Welcome to the new season of the Live Your Spa Life show. The Spa and Spa Life stands for Seek Power Always, that divine power within you to do what you're here to do. The theme for this season is Freedom Fighter. Amazing people like you share ways to ensure your freedom physically, financially, spiritually, and in your relationships to create a world-class life. In these times of uncertainty, it's time for you to move past the distractions and start trusting yourself more through your God-given knowingness. No one truly knows better what's best for you than you. In this season, you'll have plenty of examples of people choosing their best life and giving a voice of freedom to those who are also looking to have their best life. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us and being part of the Live Your Spa Life conversation. With us today is Ari Gunzburg, a rising star in the world of personal empowerment and self-growth. As an award-winning speaker and coach, Ari helps people unlock their own personal everyday greatness. In 2020, Ari released his motivational book called The Little Book of Greatness, which, by the way, was first place in the Pencraft Awards, and it is outlining his easy-to-remember framework for growth. Ari, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Thanks for being here. I love your story. And when we look at backgrounds of, what motivated people, what got them to where they're at, a lot of times there are incidents in people's childhood that impact them. And you had something specific happen when you're 10. Can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So when I was 10 years old, we had a trip. It was like springtime, late springtime, which in Baltimore, if you've ever been to the mid-Atlantic area of the country, it gets very hot and very muggy very quickly. And so it was a nice, hot, muggy day. We went out to play some baseball, to go for a hike in the woods. And it seemed like it was going to be a fantastic, amazing, wonderful day until ...
Right.
And that's so we were out there. This is back in the 90s. So there was less of a propensity to have, 8 staff members and 5 chaperones and 15, all for like 10 kids. But we had 17 kids, and it was just our teacher with us out there. We went for a hike in the woods. And while we were in the woods, he fell over. Not that he tripped and stumbled off of a cliff or anything, but it was time for him to go. And he went, and his body just keeled over because there was nothing left moving it around. I wasn't actually with him at that moment. I was a little bit ahead on the trail playing in a stream with a bunch of the other kids. But, the kids came back, they said, there's something going on. We ran back in the woods. We saw what's going on. Everybody's in a panic. Kids are freaking out, screaming, no idea what to do. And so we went for help. And a few kids went one direction, a bunch of kids went another direction. So we kind of split up into 3 groups. One group stayed with him, 2 groups went for help. And on our way out of there, we were trying to figure out where to go. And we were trying to run because it was an emergency situation. We have to go. Let's go. But on the other hand, we didn't know what had happened to him. And on the off chance that what had happened to him was based on the heat, we were like, okay, we got to stop. We got to relax. We got to try and breathe a little bit. We got to let ourselves calm down and also let the body not overheat, basically. Eventually, we were still trying to figure out our way out of the woods, but that's when we heard this music off in the distance. We were like, that's weird because we're in the woods. There shouldn't be music. And it sounded almost like carnival music. Later on, we found out exactly the type of music it was. So we started following the music. We're like, look, we don't know what it is. We don't know why it's there, but music equals people. So let's follow the music. We got to the edge of the woods, and there was no carnival. There were no giant groups of people. It was just one man standing there wearing a kilt, playing the bagpipes, which is very strange. But
right.
for years, at this point, basically the way that I view it is that it must have been one of those weird situations where he's sitting at home and he's not really sure what he's doing that day. And all of a sudden he gets this idea, I have to go play the bagpipes. I have to go practice today at this spot, right now.
Right.
And he has no idea why he has this compulsion to do it or anything. But meanwhile, somebody pulling the strings behind the scenes is these kids need to be able to find their way out of the woods. They need the sound signal to be able to pull themselves out of the woods. So you're going to be there. You're going to be playing the bagpipes that day.
Right.
Once we got to him and we found him standing over there, we could see these buildings off in the distance. So we ran over to them. Later on, I found out it was the Chesapeake Bay, I believe, Outward Bound School, I much later became an alumnus of Outward Bound, Hurricane Island Outward Bound up in Maine. And so we grabbed a couple of guys, they grabbed their med kit, they came running back with us, and we walked all through the woods until we brought them back to where our teacher was laying on the leaves. They started immediately doing CPR. They gathered us and took us out of the woods. And then, so like the teachers at the school, they didn't tell us anything. And not literally, figured. But they put us in the van, then they drove us home one by one, and they wouldn't discuss any of it with us. My father later called up the school to say, hey, my son was on this field trip with the rabbi, like what happened? And I was like watching him with this phone call, and you could see like he was just genuinely curious, like what's going on? Like I'm checking into my son, and like everything just dropped. His face, his eyes, like everything. I was like, oh, I see. And like he slowly hung up the phone and looked back up at me and, sorry, it's gone. Mm. That was a pretty big moment. Like he knew him also. So I think the passing affected him a lot also. He was, the man was 50 years old in 1995-ish. So they were the same age. Plus minus 2-3 years or something, my dad and this guy. And so like, boom, just, shock, awe, like no idea what's going on. Like, anytime somebody passes, it's difficult, but when somebody young passes, especially somebody that we know, it can hit home a little hard. And so he just held me, and like, we're just sitting there crying in the foyer or the kitchen or whatever. I remember the linoleum floor,
yeah,
crying for just a really long time.
Right. It's interesting that happened in the woods, and wilderness is a passion of yours. Sometimes when people have an experience, they either don't want to go back to that, or they have an association with that. Maybe enjoying the wilderness actually was inspired by that. Do you see anything with the correlation?
I do. So a number of years ago, I was prepping for a winter mountaineering and ice climbing trip in Colorado. So I started going hiking a lot. And what I started to realize on these different hikes, because I was going with a group, Cleveland has the Cleveland Hiking Club, which is fantastic. If you're ever in the Cleveland area and you're not sure what to do, where to go, anything like that, you can look up their website, show up to any of their hikes. They have tons of them scheduled and everything. It's really amazing. But anyways, I started going on hikes with them to prep my body for the rigors of the Colorado wilderness. And I really started exploring this idea, and I realized that I think that I kind of removed myself a little bit from wilderness type situations for a long time, even though I have this deep passion for the wilderness. And I think it had to do with this event. And once I had that realization, it was a little bit easier to say, okay, look, even though I know that this had happened in my past, and even though that I know that it's possible for something bad to happen to people when they're out there, nevertheless, I love being out there. And so I'm going to go anyways. I'm going to make it a point to go. Additionally, at the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, I was certified for my first time as a wilderness first responder, which is a medical certification just below EMT for the wilderness only, to sit there and deal with any major catastrophic medical situations out in the wilderness. And I just renewed it at the beginning of this year. So that's meaning, yes, there is this thing. Yes, I could use it as a catalyst to say, no, I don't want to go out there. But instead, I'm trying to use it as a source of strength, and then gathering the tools to deal, God forbid, if anything like that ever happens again, to have the tools to deal with it. Right. One thing that I would note is that, call it what you want. Some people might call it PTSD. I don't diagnose or anything, so like, I wouldn't know what it's actually called, but there are times when I'm out there. Just the other day, I did a long-ish hike and everything. And while I was out there, like, I'm out there by myself, there's nobody with me, it's 3+ miles there, 3+ miles back and everything. And there's always the question of like, well, I don't know, maybe this is it, like and I understand that it's very much based on that happening, right? That there's this, I guess, morbid fear that maybe something like that will happen to me. I mean, who knows? We never know where we're going to go. But so it does still strike, I guess you could say, here and there, like, yeah. But I mean, I don't like to let things like that stop me. try new things, even though there is sometimes fear. I'll give you
Mm-hmm.
one example. I run a camp sometimes for teens, like with the wilderness stuff, when it makes sense and it works out. It didn't work out this year. And so a bunch of the guys last year were bugging me. They're like, let's go skydiving, let's go skydiving, let's go skydiving. So I'm not really into skydiving. It's not really the type of thing that I love. Like I love roller coasters, but the drop part of roller coasters I don't love. So I imagine a skydiving experience would be like the drop, just a lot more feet. And so I told them, I said, listen, if you can get every single kid to say yes and every single group of parents to sign off on it, then we'll go skydiving. Meaning at the end of the day, if there was an opportunity to go, I probably would end up going, but I'm not running. And they're like, but we'll never get everybody to say yes. I said, exactly.
Right, right. Well, and we never know what kind of things that that we face, and different fears trigger different things. You've talked before about powering through things and how certain circumstances give you an opportunity for that. It kind of reminds me of your character David in your book, where here he is on a cliff, right? In the wilderness, right? And I don't know if there was a correlation or a catalyst with that character in particular about, being in the wilderness and facing life, facing fears, and making positive choices and being able to look at the journeys that you go on. Was there any correlation there?
Not on purpose, but we are, I believe we're often surprised what the subconscious does to us. The inspiration for that scene. So there's two different parts of that scene. There's where it happens, and then there's what's happening there. What's happening there, the inspiration is just that just feeling of being overwhelmed and trepidation that we all get sometimes with everything that's going on. The where inspiration, when I was younger, I was in Jersey, and there was like this battle of the bands or something at this high school. And a bunch of us afterwards went, and I don't even know where it was, but I was friends with a bunch of people who knew where this thing was. So we just drove off to the spot where we like parked the car, walked through the woods a little bit, and we were in this like overpass, not an overpass. It was like a cliff hanging, looking over the highway, which is just like a really cool spot, like middle of the night, like teens doing what teens do. And that's where the where inspiration came from. So, but yeah, there's certainly, I think, anytime somebody's standing in a place of decision, in a moment of decision like that, a cliff is almost always an appropriate imagery for that type of thing. I do use, a cliff as an imagery in the speeches that I talk about, we'll be standing by the cliffs of despair or whatever, That's
Yeah.
my fantasy buff coming out. But yeah, definitely, there's definitely something there. I'm hearing what you're saying. I love the fact that you connected that. It's I've never really thought about that like that before, but there's definitely something there.
Okay, got it. Well, and speaking of your teen years, you refer to the wild years and things going on, and now as a happily married man with 4 young children, how does that influence your parenting?
So much so. I see what family members are doing, and when I say family, I don't mean immediate, but like more like extended cousins, niece, nephews, whatever it might be. I see the stuff that they're doing and the struggles that they're going through, and I see I guess if you have the right perspective, there's always parallels between stuff that we went through when we were growing up and stuff that they're going through. Obviously it's different, it's a different era, there's different things that are going on, but I certainly see a lot of myself in kids who are struggling now, whether they're family members or not. And the influence on the parenting, there's a lot of perspective of like, oh, these are the types of things that I feel like were catalysts either for myself or for kids that I knew to sit there and have major, major problems in their teenage years. So whenever possible, I try to avoid those types of things or to lessen the impact if somebody else is doing it. One good example would be confidence, right? If you are the type of parent who's obsessed with your kid getting into the best possible school at all possible times, then there's a lot of pressure, and the kid has to be doing well academically. But and this is something I've heard from my brother as well, but at the end of the day, when a kid finishes high school and then finishes college, the most important thing I think one of the biggest markers for success is how confident that kid feels, how their self-esteem is, right? They can learn almost nothing in school, but if they have the confidence and the self-esteem, if they need to know something and they have at least a moderate level of intelligence or higher, they'll be able to learn it pretty quickly. Like
Right.
I asked my brother at one point, and he's like, well, I'm not really so worried if they don't know that stuff when they get out of school about it, talking about his kids, because if they finish school and they're confident and they have self-esteem and they all these other personal issues are not there, they'll be able to do anything. And so that's, so bringing it back to the example that I initially brought up, if my daughter is going to school, and this, this is a whole development right now, but if she's in a school that is building her confidence and building her self-esteem, and they're not necessarily the best school in the world academically, I personally think that it's a lot less important. Meaning I think the soft skills, a kid walking out of school with all of those soft skills, like the self-esteem and the confidence, and I know that I can do it, and I'll be able to deal with it, and just because it gets hard, it doesn't matter. Like if they're able to walk out of school with those types of skills, even if they don't necessarily know who was president in 1802 or whatever, then they'll be okay. And that's not a disparagement on history. History is very important, and understanding history is very important because it helps us understand what's going on today and the potential pitfalls of certain things happening, right? That's part of it. But again, right, having that confidence, I think, is a bigger booster in life than almost anything else.
I think you're actually right on track with that, because if you don't have, and I wouldn't even call them soft skills, right? I actually think those are actually more important. If you know how to be kind, if you know how to have confidence, if you trust that no matter what you do, that you're going to figure it out. I think that there's a lot happening about people not having, resilience or the tenacity or the grit to move through something, and, if you've got those skills, I mean, there's search engines to look up for the facts of what's going on. It's not to say that those things aren't important, but common sense isn't always common, right? And so when people really learned, and this is where experience comes into play, and those really make a big difference. And like even for you, like with your journey, I'd love for you to share a little bit about that, because you put on several different hats along your journey to get into speaking and a coach, and that's always not a straight path or road for people. For me, I don't know if I was a San Diego police officer for 10 years. So I worked on the street as well as I worked undercover. And so a lot of times looking at the leap when I shift into, speaking and podcasting and consulting, a lot of people will be like, well, how is that on the same road? How does that make sense? But one of the things that I do help people with is being able to make quick decisions, being able to trust their intuition. And so those are skills that I learned on that. And it also helps in the private sector as well. So there are some commonalities of who we are and who we bring to the table that may not make sense to the outsider. So I'd love for you to share about your journey and how you kind of wore some of those different hats and you came to speaking and coaching.
Sure. So, I mean, there's so many different parts of it, as you know. I mean, when we live through life, I mean, there's just so many different events and catalysts that we can look at. So you're not talking specific about the teenage years. You're talking more about later, like how I ended up in speaking, correct?
Correct.
Okay, cool. So yes, so I went through a lot in the teenage years. There's a slight possibility that there may have been a few times that if we were living in the same city, we would have crossed paths. If you were, you being a police officer or whatnot. But so a little bit later in life, before my daughter was born, she's 5 now. So she's turning 6 in like November time. So right before she was born, I was invited to come speak at a juvenile detention center. Somebody I know was working there. She was a social worker or something, and she was working over there. She's like, okay, I need people to come in and talk about careers, because the only careers that these guys understand or think that are possible is basically a teacher, police officer, drug dealer, or prison guard. Like that's in their world, like that's just about it. And I'm sure there's a few more in there, but
Right.
they just don't see the level of opportunity that's really available to them. So first, I thought back to the days that I had spent in there, which was, I mean, again, right, small, quick little lockups here and there, but I was like, I don't want to go back, right? Just, we were talking before about the forest, like the memories that I have of being, I was like, no interest, no thanks, I'm not available, can't do it. And after a few days of thinking about it, I was like, of all the people that she asked, because she asked within our circle of friends, I'm probably the one who can actually help these kids the most, because instead of being like, well, here's what I do, and they're like, that's nice, that's just not attainable for me, I can get in there and say, listen, I know where you are because I've been there before, and
Right.
here's what I do. And so I against my better judgment, I said, you know what, maybe I should come in and speak to them. And then I prepared a lot, and the night before, late at night, I just got this massive blast of imposter syndrome, and like, who the hell do I think that I am? And why do I think that they would want to hear my story? Yeah, I'm supposed to go in there and talk about my career, but they're not going to want to hear about all my past and the things that I did. And like, they just have no interest in that. So I had everything prepared, and I'm like, well, what do I do now? So I had to like figure out what, like, a plan. And so the plan that I came up with was, I'll pitch it to them. I'll say, listen, we can start with my story. I'll tell you about the stuff that I went through and how I lived moments like you're living right now. Or I could just give you the presentation about marketing and design, which is the field that I was in at the time. And I asked them when I first got there, and by show of hands, basically unanimously, they were like, we'd love to hear about your story. And so I told my story, and it was just this amazing moment of connecting with them, telling my story. That was about 45 minutes. We did a little marketing presentation for about 45 minutes where they branded a product. You know, what color are we going to make the bottle? What product are we dealing with? What color are we going to make the bottle? What are we going to call it? The tagline. And I went home and made a quick like graphic image of what we had created together. And I sent it off to her. So she printed it out, put it up on the wall, which made them feel like, oh, this guy values us. Like, he went home and he did above and beyond. He sent over something so we can see the fruits of our labor. Which was really cool. Like, they were the comments that she was texting me that they were saying were fantastic. I can't really say them on air unless you have an explicit rating. But no, it was just a great experience overall. And right around that same time, I was working with a business coach. Like, what should I do with the rest of my life? I don't love the marketing that I work in, but maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll do something else. And speaking came up. And from that moment, basically the two of those things together, I started on this journey. And it's been a long, hard journey, I would say, just because, I've met speakers before who had, I guess you could say, maybe family money, maybe a nest egg behind them. So there are all sorts of places that offer services to speakers, right? If you want to get started as a speaker, you take $20,000 or $50,000 or whatever, and you spend it. And these people will work with you every step of the way and help you create everything. One of my colleagues, she told me at one point, she's like, I invested $50,000 into my speaking business. And she was not seeing the success that she had wanted to see. And she in the end did not like the industry so much. So she had told me, she said, when I finished making that $50,000 back out of my business, basically I'm done. And so I looked into some of her stuff recently, and it seems like she's moved back into her old career and whatnot. It's not to say that she wouldn't speak, but again, right. So it's an industry, and she wasn't loving it. But anyways, so I had to bootstrap it the whole way. So I used my marketing background. And so it's gone through a few different levels of, website and materials that just did not do such a great job, to doing a little bit better. And my team and I right now are actually working on a whole new set of videos and a whole new website. Just finished the speaker one sheet a little bit ago, it looks, in my own opinion, which is maybe a little biased, but it looks like really nice and everything. So we've just been going through this journey, but going back to that day in the juvie, I mean, that was absolutely amazing. And breaking that barrier, right? Because I said before that I was a little bit scared to go in there. I don't know if scared is the right word, but I didn't want to go in there, right? It was right. A nervous thing. Later on, I ended up getting in touch with somebody in the Pennsylvania State Department of Corrections. And so she hooked up, and so I ended up speaking in a few prisons in Pennsylvania. And because I had done that in the juvenile detention center in Cleveland, I didn't have that. I mean, there was still like, I'd never been in a maximum security prison before. So now it's like, I don't really want to go. Well, it's probably going to be just fine. And it was, it was a bunch of people. As much as there are, I guess, some people who maybe need to be kept away from society, it's, I'm trying to like say this the people in there are often still just people. And, and sometimes it's, so it's just an interesting thing to see. I mean, the experiment that they did, I think in the 70s or something, where they took a bunch of university students and they put them in the basement and they assigned some as guards and some as prisoners.
Right. People take on their roles.
And it's often curious to me how much of this this bias against people in prison is because of the role that they're supposed to be fulfilling, and how much of it is because these people are actually, and again, right, there are people who do really, really, really bad things that are unequivocally bad, violent crime, things just, I'm trying to make like a little bit of a separation between that and other stuff. And again, the law is the law. You can't break the law, but I don't know.
Yeah. No, I know what you're saying.
Justice system reform is a topic that is way too big to tackle in a short podcast, and way too big for me to even begin to think that I would have an answer. But I think that a lot of people agree that there are potentially ways to make what we're using right now better, more effective, with better outcomes.
Right. Right. Well, I think across the board, it's always a reflection, like any one area of society is a reflection of the greater society. And so, in any profession, there are people that exceed and there are people that do well. Anything, it comes down to those personal choices, right? And so Absolutely. Some people will learn from those choices and they'll make better ones. Others either don't have opportunities or they don't seek them out. And so, this is one of the things in having conversations like this is to have people think about, hey, we've all heard before, like, your message is in your mess, right? And that's why that audience wanted to hear your story, because they want to know that they can get on the other side of hard things. And people get into that imposter syndrome. They get into that, like, who are we? But all of our story allows people to look at how we can overcome something, how we can use that for good. You've even talked before about, failure is not a destination. It's a path to success, right? And so we can use all of those failures and we can either decide to get on that path to succeed and learn from that, or we keep falling down and, we don't make some of those changes. So I think this is it's a great, like you said, it's kind of a snippet conversation that we get to have here, to be able to explore these. This gives, our listeners a chance to think about, what are the things that they're embarrassed to talk about, or what are the things that maybe they aren't willing to share, and to, have some of these conversations is a big thing. And how we create in our life is a big deal too. And this may seem like this totally isn't relevant, but one of the things I always like to ask my guests is, because we do create our life and we do create our environments. And so how we live in our bedroom versus our kitchen or our office is very different. And I'm just curious to see, what is your favorite room in your home? Out of left field.
No, I'm like sitting there thinking, I'm like, I don't know, just because we're in the process of like figuring out moving and everything. So it's like everything's kind of like just up in the air and whatnot. If anything, I'd have to say the office, just because that's where I'm able to most sit there and be like, that's my stuff. So just kind of like leave it where it is. Everywhere else is, with 4 little kids at home, it's just a whirlwind of so much going on and everything. So that's like my space, I guess. So that I would have to say that room. But if I may, just before we were talking about the whole prison thing, sometimes all it takes is like a little spark of an idea to create like a fire, basically. Like when we light a fire, you get one tiny little spark on some kindling and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So I just wanted to throw something out there, again, way above my pay grade. But I had this idea that I was kind of like thinking very, very briefly the other day, and I just figured I'll put it out there to the world. And if somebody sits there and can figure out a whole system based off of it, yeah, I'd had this idea of like sitting there kind of like just taking people and segregating. Again, which level gets to go, I don't know, but segregating, instead of being like in a prison system where everything's full lockdown, kind of making just kind of like locked away villages or whatever, and putting it so that people can spend the next 10 years living a life. They're just cut off from society in a way that's not the same thing as like dropping them into a room with a key lock and a key, if that makes sense. And right. I don't want to like touch on that like very, very deeply. If there is somebody in the field and they're like, oh, this is a great idea, and they just want, by all means, develop it if you can figure out something out with it. But and feel free to reach out to me and have deeper conversations. Again, it might be a terrible idea, but sometimes we get good ideas from throwing things out there in the world.
Right.
But, yeah. So the favorite room would have to be the office, just because it's the room that I'm most able to say, this is my space with my stuff around and stuff like that. What do you have for your favorite room?
Mine's my bedroom.
Bedroom.
Because that's kind of where I've got that serenity. I've made a point of not having electronics in my bedroom, so it's like where I get a recharge. It's like I have things I look at that inspire me, So I just think that I'm always curious about that because I've had some people say my back porch because I get to look outside, or I've had somebody say their closet, right, because nobody else is in there, and some people will say the kitchen because then that's where they get to have experiences with their family. So it's just curious to me. I started doing this like 6 years ago, and it's always been kind of a fun segue thing to talk about because, what people choose to do and what they create for themselves to live the life that they want to live. It just has people think of a different way. It's kind of a fun thing.
It's awesome. It's
Nice.
terrific. It
Nice.
sounds like your bedroom's a real oasis for you. That's really amazing.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, I can't believe our time here is already coming to an end, and I know that people are going to want to stay connected with you. How can they best do that?
The best thing to do is to go to my website. It links to anything and everything else that you possibly could need. It's just arigunz.com, just arigunz.com. The easy way to remember it is guns with a Z, arigunz.com.
Perfect. Sounds good. And, as we've talked before, our theme for this season is around freedom. How are you creating freedom in your life for yourself or others?
I think the best way to put it is that I am using the books and the other things that I do to create freedom. Whenever I see places that I can hopefully add a little something to somebody and give them a little bit more feeling of control over their life or a little bit more feeling of freedom or anything like that, I like to do it. As we were talking before about this book that I put together about coronavirus, right as school was starting back up in 2020, I think it was. It might have been 2021, but I think it was 2020. And there's all these different things going on. There was families who were masking, their families who weren't masking, their families who felt like this was the right thing to do and that the right thing to do. And there were so many different opinions on what it was to do. And so I felt like there could be a lot of anxiety for kids because I'm wearing a mask and they're not wearing a mask, or a kid who's not wearing a mask and they are wearing a mask. And so the book was focused on kind of just a springboard for a conversation for parents to have with their kids, where they could kind of like read the book to the kid, and as they're reading the book, it basically explains like, look, they feel like this is the best thing that they can do, and we feel that this is the best thing that we can do, and we're both right because we don't really know. And so the fact that that's what they're deciding to do, that's on them. The fact that this is what we're deciding to do, that's on us. But this is what we're doing, and that's what they're doing, and that's okay. It comes into play sometimes also with, different people have different culture within their family, within their religion, within their everything like that. And so the more that we can acknowledge that that's how they live, and this is something that they're doing, and that's okay, doesn't mean that we do it. That opens up that conversation to have, with kids. It's sometimes hard because they don't understand. They understand a lot more than most people give them credit for.
Right.
They don't have that world of view that helps them to understand that there are so many different cultures, and even within cultures, there's so many different subcultures, and there's just so many different ways of doing things. And so, anything that we can do to give kids that greater understanding. I talk about almost anything with my kids, and sometimes I watch even doctors kind of almost ignore that the kid is there, just talk directly to the adult. And meanwhile, the kid's like, not quite saying like, I'm right here, why aren't you talking to me? But like the kid's like, well, wait, what's going on? And they're like complete. And it's like, no, the kids can understand a lot more than you give them credit for. And we can have these conversations with them. We might have to change how we say it because they don't understand some words, but and so I have those conversations with my kids no matter how old they are.
Yeah. Nice. No, it's so good. I mean, anything that, has people be, more united and just have the freedom to speak. Like if we've seen anything over the last couple of years is, people being censored or shut down and, like their opinions don't matter, and that there's only like, one thing. And obviously that's become a big political thing. But I think that as people, to really be able to have a conversation, to be like, I'm curious, like, why are you making the decision you're making? Or, you know what? I respect that that's what you want to do for your family, but, don't put that on me and my family. Right. And so to have this where it's like, hey, we all get to still make choices. This is all still America. And this is part around that decision around about freedom, about how we're creating that. And that's one of the beautiful things about our country, is that we can all have these different perspectives and still be able to make the decisions that are best for ourselves and our family. So I love that you created a resource for that, to be able to spark a conversation with children, because there's a lot of confusion and things out there. So I just wanted to thank you for your time and your wisdom, and for you just stepping out and, your everyday greatness that you're about. And I appreciate you.
I greatly appreciate you having me on the show. And just to touch back on one thing you were just talking about before, there's a reason why they made speech the First Amendment, right? They were like, everything else stems from that ability to talk. And so, yes, it's like you were saying, it's important that people are able to have that voice and to be able to share what they're thinking, and some people are thinking things that we would not necessarily agree with or want to take part in, but the ability to be able to express that is sacrosanct and very important for at least American values. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. Thank you very much for everything. I appreciate it.
You got it. And for our listeners out there, we so appreciate you being here with us. And until we connect again, live your spa life. Bye for now. Bye-bye.